Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson, and welcome to the Northtown News Magazine.
For the identity of the real Marty Levinson, stay tuned to the Northtown News Magazine.
Good. Hi, I'm Marty Levinson, the real Marty Levinson. All these people have been doing me for 7 years, maybe 8 years, but I really am the Marty Levinson that you all want to see. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine show with the greatest cameraman around, Sonny Hirsch, and your host of 22 years on television, Avi.
Thank you, Marty. Avi Meyers, Northtown Neighborhood News Magazine, a presentation of Sonny Hirsch and myself. Web, ntnm.org. All of our shows on YouTube, about 250,000 watched. Thank you so much. The community policing, caps24.org. I'd like to salute Commander Roussel, Sergeant Kane, and all the men and women in the community policing office of the 24th District for keeping things going as well as they have. And when people work together with the police, it can make a difference in your community, and it's a worthwhile thing to do. If you go to caps24.org, you'll find all the weekly meetings, all the monthly meetings for Rogers Park, West Rogers Park, and part of Edgewater. It is a pleasure to have election lawyer extraordinaire, which is the title we've decided on, James P. Nally. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Avi. First things first, on our last show, due to my error, I forgot to bring the traditional date book that I give to you every year so you can plot out your shows and your guests. And I do have one today that I'd like to formally present to you and wish you well.
Oh, the Book of Nally. I can see. I can see. This is, by the way, it's true. I really use this on a regular. This is my TV show and my Jewish Chicago paper book. That's where I keep all my information. And yeah, you've always got like really nice books, and but you went from the green this year.
Yeah, we'll change it up a little bit once in a while.
Yeah, by the way, remind me to give you the one that. Oh, so you know what? One thing I didn't mention to you when we're starting is when this is going to air, because we've been doing things in advance. This is going to air approximately mid-April.
Okay.
And we're doing this shortly before St. Patrick's Day. And I think if it actually, like if they could have, the Pope got, picked today, and if they could have held out a few more days to St. Patrick's Day, maybe they would have picked an Irish one.
Well, maybe the next time, huh? We'll see how this guy does. I wish him well.
Yeah. No, listen, you always hope, this is one of the most important people in the world. There's 1.2 billion Catholics, and it's a tremendous influence, and you're in a world right now with all sorts of changes.
Well, and I think it's actually kind of a good change. About 40% of the Catholic Church is Latino or of Latin American origin, and this Pope being from Argentina is probably a very good thing culturally and for a lot of other reasons.
I was looking at his last name. His last name sounds very Italian, which has maybe made them feel more comfortable.
Well, actually, from what I understand, his parents were born in Italy and immigrated to Argentina.
That's interesting, because the only previous, and why does a good Jewish boy know this much about the Catholic Church? We were at Jewel earlier, and I was busy. These two people were asking questions of them, a couple of Catholics, and I had to tell them what was what with the Catholic Church. But other than the Pope that just stepped down, who was from Germany, I don't think there's ever been a non-Italian, somebody from other than Italy before.
It was centuries prior to Pope John Paul, who was from Poland, and then the.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a long time prior to that.
Yeah. So no, it's quite a history, and that's actually technically the smallest country in the world.
Yes, yes, and I know people who collect postage stamps and coins and things like that. They're very popular.
Well, they're giving to the church, and it's a good way for them to make money.
Yeah, well, it's a scarce commodity, and people want it, and people collect those things are really into that.
Yeah. Now, usually we wind up talking about different election law and all the rest of it, but actually there is technically, and by the time this airs, it will have been over. There are suburban elections, April 9th, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube before we air. Were there any real developments this year at all in terms of election law or changes in matters?
Not a lot, Avi. There were a couple of changes. One was kind of interesting. There was a statute that was passed last year that now says that if you file nomination papers for an organized political party, such as the Democrats or Republicans, and then you withdraw from that you can't run as an independent in the general election for that cycle, because you've kind of essentially you picked your team and you got to stay on that team until the end of that election cycle. And that will affect a few people who are running in this April cycle, because people did file for the February 26th primary, and anybody who withdrew from there in the past was able to say, well, I can still jump in as an independent candidate, and they can't do that now.
You know, that sounds kind of fair to me. As a matter of fact, our mutual friend Scott Cohn resigned as Democratic Lieutenant Governor, then ran as an independent for governor later. Would that also disqualify him from doing that in the future?
It would now, yeah. And the other interesting thing, as a result of what happened with Scott, there has been a change that will take effect in 2014, that for the first time in the primary, the candidate, if you're running for governor, you have to pick a running mate for lieutenant governor, and the two people will run as a team. So this will be the first time with that new setup for even a primary election. In the past, there was a separate election. Anybody who wanted to run for lieutenant governor ran, and then people who wanted to run for governor ran, and then whoever won each race ended up as the team for the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, to run in November. Now the law has been changed so that in the primary coming up in 2014, people will run as a team. So if you file for governor, you'll also file with a running mate who will be associated with you as a lieutenant governor candidate, and people will vote for that ticket in the primary just like they would in a general election.
That's going to be interesting, because that puts more into play in the subject. Before, you just had to worry about, well, I'm voting for this governor, but you know, nationally, people don't think too much about vice presidents. You know, they really don't. And as much as, you know, like, I was talking with Sonny earlier, and he was talking about what a catastrophe Sarah Palin would have been. By the way, both parties are catastrophes on a national basis. I think that's becoming abundantly clear over the last, you know, couple of decades. But, you know, it's like, the truth is, people on a national level really don't vote for vice president. People really vote for president.
Well, if you look at what happened in Illinois, obviously most people, you're correct. When they go in, you know, they're voting for somebody running for governor. Lieutenant governor's an afterthought. But you know, as it turns out, you know, the last Democratic governor prior to Pat Quinn was Rod Blagojevich, and he ended up having to leave office. And when he did leave office, lieutenant governor suddenly became a very important office, and the person who was holding it, Pat Quinn, ended up running for and retaining a full term in the office.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there's been 4 governors in my lifetime that have been convicted for felonies. And you know what? It's funny, because I used to work for all these independents, you know, like as a volunteer. And the first guy I ever worked for that won an election was Dan Walker, who was famous as a populist mayor who walked all over the state, you know, walked thousands of miles throughout the state of Illinois. And yeah, this is really an interesting state.
Yeah, well, that I think will actually bring a little more order to the system, because you know, potentially you could always have 2 people elected as governor and lieutenant governor who, even within their party, have very different philosophical viewpoints, and one might be way more conservative than the other, more liberal. And I think that this will lead to a little more balance, perhaps. And I think you'll see people running for governor, they'll be looking for running mates to look for, you know, geographic balance, gender balance, you know, ethnic balance, things like that. So at least I think the governor, whoever is running for governor, who they pick, will be somebody that would, I think, philosophically be kind of close to them, so that if for some reason they ended up leaving office, there'd be more continuity in terms of policy.
You know, it's interesting, because the longer time goes, the more I'm so out of the idea of left or right or Democrat or Republican. I just like somebody who can do a good job. Because, you know, a lot of this stuff really isn't that ideological. No matter what noise, you know, see, it's one thing, the noise that Congress people and state legislators and all the rest of it make. There's a big difference between the noise and what they really vote for and what happens. For instance, you would think that things like what they call entitlements, you know, would go sky high under Democrats and Republicans not. Over the last 50 years, the amount of entitlements is actually 8% a year higher under Republicans than Democrats.
It's interesting.
You wouldn't think that. I mean, think about it. Look at all the stuff that Nixon did. You know, Bush did the prescription thing. I'm not saying that this is good or bad. I'm just saying it's real. You know, Nixon was Medicare and other things like that. So, you know what? These guys, my mother always used to joke around. It's like, you know, it's the Democrats who get us into war, and it's the Republicans who are supposed to be the business party who ruin the economy. And if you were actually to look at the presidents, you would find that most of the wars do start under Democrats, and the Republicans is a absolute rule ruin the economy. So you know what? I like the idea of a response. I like the idea of just like somebody like a response. You know, somebody like Terry O'Brien, somebody who's intelligent and responsible, and just wants to do a good job. You know, somebody who knows how to run a business.
Well, I think it's interesting, and as we get through the municipal election here, it won't be that long. You know, people will begin circulating petitions for the 2014 election, September of this year. So
Wow.
we're pretty close to seeing all that activity picking up on a statewide basis. And of course, it's a gubernatorial year, so there'll be a number of offices, and in both parties, I think there'll be pretty spirited primaries.
Oh, I definitely think so. You know, I don't really know too much about this guy Rauner, the Republican, but I like the way, it's funny, you take a look at a guy like that, and as much as I like the idea he talks about running the state as a responsible business, fiscally, the fact is, it also scares me, these guys who are independently wealthy, they don't have to take contributions from anybody. I mean, they could also go nuts about certain things, like Big Gulp, Mayor Bloomberg in New York.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the courts just stepped in there and said, no, you're not going to be able to limit the size of these drinks, at least for now. But it does make you, immune to some extent to public opinion, because if you're not worried about raising money because you have enough of your own to fund whatever you're going to do, you're not going to be concerned of turning off donors or turning off members of the public or what the polls are saying. And there's good and bad to that,
No, it's true. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that, like, this is stuff that within the Jewish world that I'm more familiar with. But, the ritual of circumcision that, started with Abraham and all the rest of it and God, he basically thinks it's somewhat barbaric. And this is a Jewish guy. And he doesn't want to allow certain parts of the circumcision unless the parents give signed consent to it, which is kind of, to me, horrific. I mean, that'd be like telling you, it's like, well, the 7 sacraments, forget a couple of them. You don't do that.
Well, it's a larger question. It seems like on a national level, social issues and how much regulation can be made of people's private activities and private beliefs, where do you stop? We saw recently here in Illinois in the Republican Party, Pat Brady, who's been the chairperson of the state Republican Party, recently came out in favor of allowing the legislature to pass a gay marriage bill. And that led to a movement within his own party to try to oust him, which, as of last week at least, had not succeeded. But it's kind of an interesting issue that both parties wrestle with is, at what point can you tell people how they should live their private lives, and at what point are you over the line?
Yeah, by the way, interestingly enough, in Capital Facts today, Rich Miller was writing that Mike Madigan said there are about a dozen votes short in the House, which is largely Democratic. And, it's interesting because people, it used to be that if you were a Republican or a Democrat, you could be a conservative Democrat or a liberal Republican. And that's not the case anymore, hardly.
Well, a lot of it has to do with redistricting. And, the parties that control the redistricting, we've just gone through that in all the states as a result of the 2010 census. And every state then, based on the demographics there, you have to redistrict at least every 10 years to make sure that the one man, one vote concept is kept, where you wouldn't have a district where there's 1 million people in one and then 100,000 in another, and therefore those 100,000 have a disproportionate voice. So what has happened, though, is that whatever party happens to be in control of the state legislatures and the governorships in the states have a free rein then to draw the map to their will. And for instance, in Illinois, the Democratic Party was in that position. So the districts that have been drawn now were definitely drawn in a way that skewed Democratic. And you see that in the House of Representatives. Even though last fall, when President Obama was reelected, there's something of a Democratic comeback, because in many of the states, the Republican Party controlled the map-making process, even in light of that very large movement towards the Democrats by voters. You didn't see a big change in the House of Representatives because of that, because these districts were drawn in states where the Republican Party controlled, and that's the majority of states in the United States right now, in a way that it favored Republican candidates. And that's the way it is. I mean, Illinois did it in a way that favored Democrats, and it's no different in a state where the Republicans are in
I
control.
mean, I've had people tell me who've been in slating meetings that they'll actually argue over a particular block because if they know who's voting there, they want the positive or negative votes in their area.
You look at this map, and there are literally boundary lines that go down alleys. And one side of the alley is in one district, and one is in the other. It is that defined, and really with the advent of all the data processing that computers give us, there are people who are experts in this and are brought in from across the country to sit down and take the data from the census and literally grind it down to that level to say, this block you'll pick up 4 votes if you keep it in, and you'll lose 3 votes if you keep this other block in. It's that fine now in terms of the ability of people to take that data and then use it for purposes of cartography.
That's interesting. That's scary. In a perfect world, well, this wouldn't be a perfect world solution either. It's like I shouldn't give myself that kind of credit ever. But I just like to see everything thrown randomly into a computer and let the computer spit it out and whatever it is.
There are states that actually have not too many, but have gone to a model where they've taken that power away from the legislature and they create a commission. And the commission is, one of the things is to draw these, first of all, to draw these as contiguous as possible.
Yeah.
So you don't have these kind of crazy districts that zigzag, for 12 miles this way, and, they're a block wide and a mile long. Taking that into consideration, taking into consideration the boundaries of existing communities. And there are a couple states that have actually gone to this last census and drawn their boundaries. So you can look there and see pretty, somewhat close to squares or boxes for these districts, and also not seeing, for instance, a community split right down the middle and one half of the community being in one district and one half in the other.
Well, I know that, for instance, Alderman Fioretti, who was a guest on last month's show, who you know much better than I do, but he's a pretty good guy. I was looking at the map of his district, because I always try to figure these things out when I have somebody on. And besides for the fact that they really messed up the neighborhoods all over the place, and they probably would have preferred that he didn't get elected, it actually kind of looks like a sideways semi-automatic pistol.
Well, some of these maps, I think that particular ward, the new second ward, if you look at it, is it's almost like the stuff that didn't fit somewhere else. And it's like, okay, we got 49 of them put together, and let's take whatever's left to make a ward out of it.
Yeah.
But there is...
And it's a very I mean, there's a difference between diversity and disparity, and that's a very, it's a very different, I mean, it's like over here, although there's some gerrymandering, logically neighborhoods fit into the wards. Like Rogers Park is mostly Joe Moore's, and West Rogers Park is largely the 50th ward. But over there it's sort of like, okay, we got a piece of this and a piece of that, and well, I don't want this in my district, so let's give it to the bad guy.
Well, and actually you're seeing some litigation across the country in regard to that kind of stuff, where people are making an issue of it and saying, wait a minute, we have a community that's located here and has historically been considered to be a compact community, and it's cut into 3 or 4 different districts. And there is some litigation going on now about, drawing maps that split up communities of interest, that split up demographic groups, that split up, geographic areas into, like I said, these very strange, one block wide and 1 mile long type of districts. We'll have to see where that goes, because historically the courts have recognized certain classes that need to be protected to ensure that their voting rights aren't diluted. And primarily it's been on racial grounds. The Voting Rights Act, which right now was...
Supreme Court
has just heard arguments on whether that should be abolished or greatly restricted in terms of how it's applied throughout the country. So you might also start seeing other bases then that people are bringing up to say that, no, wait a minute, you're violating people's rights when you draw a district like this because you dilute other interests of people as well.
Yeah, but the one close to me that I still remember the most is the reason our county line gets cut off 3 blocks south of here and not by a main street or a neighborhood intersection was because they kind of knew that Marv Davis, who was the legendary precinct captain from here, he brought in votes like 186 to 2. And I remember the guy with the 2 saying, I know I got 3 votes, he's cheating. But you know what? It's like they didn't want any part of the guy. And they just said, go, go to the, just, he's in Bridget, I guess that's Bridget Gaynor's district.
I believe it is, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think when you look at all that, again, this was all kind of a very crude process up until maybe the last 2 census cycles. And because of the ability to take data, and this is the same as market research or anything else. You can take data to determine, well, how many people within this district fit a certain demographic that we think would buy Buick automobiles, or, it can be also done on a basis, how many people within this district in this particular area do we think would vote Democratic versus who are independents versus who are Republicans or Greens or something else. And this information is all out there now, and there are people who are very talented who can, mine this information. And you could go to them and give them criteria, draw me a district that has the following things, and they can pretty much, take the raw census data and put that into a program that will allow you to, pretty much hit the mark on that.
It's interesting that you say that, because the truth is that, like when I was a kid, I was always into statistics, but like I do it with batting averages in baseball. And now you've got these guys being campaign managers. And when I talk to these people, I mean, like for instance, Ari Friedman, who's somebody we both liked, who lost his state Senate bid, he basically lost 52.5 to 47.5. And one of the things I didn't even realize was, I was talking to Larry Sufferman about this, and then I talked to the campaign managers involved in that campaign who confirmed it. He said basically when that district was gerrymandered, drawn up by the gerrymandered, it was drawn up to be a 60-40 Democratic district, even though there's a wealth of Republicans in that particular area. And, so do you judge a campaign manager? Well, he was supposed to get 40, he got 47.5. So does that make it a good campaign manager? Was it a good campaign? Actually, the campaign manager's a really good guy. But
well, Nate Silver comes to mind. Who came to great prominence with the national presidential election, where he pretty much called every state.
He
correctly.
did call every single state. I completely ignored the guy. I thought, okay, this is the new flavor of the week and all that, and just ignored it. And then when he hit every single state right on the presidential thing, he can't be ignored anymore.
No, and he kind of came out of, you're talking about like baseball and sports statistics. He kind of came out of that world initially, and he had developed programs and logarithms and things like that to look at statistics in terms of athletes and peak performance and what they do well and what they don't do well. And it's really just taking those same kinds of tools, and you can apply them to almost anything. As I said, you can apply them to politics, to look at and say, okay, this is who's going to win this state and here's why. To say you're selling toothpaste, okay, this is what your ad should say because you'll appeal to this demographic. It's really become marketing and ads, and it's also become that way because the old system, you were talking about some of the old precinct captains and the way they used to do business, and that's pretty much gone now. That door-to-door contact where a precinct captain would be knocking on people's doors and talking to them and obviously trying to sell a candidate, that just doesn't happen anymore. People aren't doing that, and it's politics has gone from kind of a labor-intensive pursuit where you wanted to have a lot of foot soldiers who could go out and knock on their neighbors' doors and persuade them to vote for the candidate you were pushing, to something that's much more driven by money now, where you need the money to get to people so you can do a mailing that gets in their mailbox and that they will look at, or that you can get on television and have a commercial that somebody is going to watch. And that's how you get to people now, the door-to-door, good morning, Mrs. Smith, I'm your neighbor from down the street and I'd like you to vote for this person. That's pretty much gone.
No, it seems that way, but you know what, and it is so much PR. If somebody's able to put out X number of mailings, and what's amazing to me, the two things that people, I don't understand why people believe certain things. Most people, if you think about it, they don't listen to themselves talk. People talk about how they might mistrust, this X politician or Y politician, but they send out a fancy brochure and they say the right things that may not mean anything, and they become popular. Or robocalls. When somebody gets a robocall saying, you know what, so-and-so is against this and he must not win, people really believe that stuff more than anything. And you gotta figure who's paying for that stuff. It's not a good neighbor that's letting you know that ex-candidate or ex-elected official, is against this, that, or the other thing. It's the other side doing it, and it's as bloodthirsty and vicious as. And I still remember the last time I sat down with Jan Schakowsky in her office, we talked about politics being a blood sport.
Well, it's like anything else. It's a marketing thing now, and candidates have to market themselves. And I think you've hit on something. It's also a negative marketing thing. It's not so much even the candidate saying, marketing in terms of here's what I stand for and here's why you should vote for me because you'll like my ideas on this and this and this. It's also become a negative marketing thing where, somebody wants to knock down their opponent and say, well, don't vote for this person because they believe this and this and this and this, and they're going to raise your taxes and do all these terrible things, so that it becomes almost a default choice for the other candidate. The candidate that does a negative marketing is not so much trying to let you know what they stand for. They're trying to make the other candidate so unpalatable that you're going to say, well, I don't even know who the second candidate is, but I can't vote for the bad guy here.
No, it's 100% because you know what? When most people, you listen to most people, they're telling you why they don't want to vote for a person and never tell you that they're in favor of the other guy. It's like, look at the alternative. Look what the Republicans have done. Look what the Democrats have done. That sort of thing.
Yeah,
and by the way, they're not wrong. None of them are wrong when they say things like that as a general rule.
You know what? I will say this about the negative campaign.
Yeah.
It's one thing to put out there factual things about somebody, but most of it takes maybe a wee bit of fact, a thimbleful of fact, and then turns it into some massive negative on somebody.
Well, I was going to say ancient Jewish proverb, but that's Chinese stuff. But part of in the Jewish faith, basically, we believe that in order for a lie to be effective, it's got to have at least one leg to stand on.
And I think that's what the negative campaigning is about. There probably is a kernel of truth there, but then they blow it completely out of proportion. And you have some, this guy evaded his income taxes, and it turns out he filed his income tax a week late or something, But they take a minor thing, and then they try to turn it into a more global proposition that will turn people off.
Or if you, or most of the bills that come up in various legislatures and city councils, you have all these provisions tacked onto them. So if you vote for the main part of the bill but vote against something else that you can be struck with, it's not that the person is like such a horrible person that they want those things to happen. It's more a matter of, there's just so much stuff on that bill. You can always find bad. I like on Facebook basically, and you can friend me on Facebook. It's almost all a political thing for me, and I like to have, besides for elected officials, I really like the campaign managers and the people who do the thinking and organizing and strategizing of parties. And when they start to have a discussion with it's usually within Democrat and Republican ranks, and you see all the negative stuff about the other one, but both sides fully agree that negative campaigning is the only thing that works right now.
Well, and you point to something else, with the social media, the internet, anybody can put anything out on Twitter, anybody can put anything out on the internet. There's no accountability or no requirement that it be vetted or proven to be correct before you can put it up there. And I understand there's certainly free speech interest that, we ought to let people do that, but people need to do their homework, because just because you read it somewhere on the internet or it's on somebody's Facebook page doesn't make it true.
Unfortunately, and we've only got half a minute left, by the way, unfortunately, when people go into the voting booth sometimes, they just lose their train of thought and do things that are remarkably not in the country's best interest one way or another. Or, people talk about, well, we don't have time for that. Anyway, I want to thank you very much, Jim Nally, election lawyer extraordinaire. And if you don't have the Book of Nally, well, too bad, but I hope all of you were inscribed in the Book of Nally for a good year. And I want to thank you very much. If people would like to contact you,
I can be reached at 312-422-5560.
I'd like to thank Jim Nally. I want to thank my entire technical crew, Sonny Hirsch. Next week on the show, we'll have Alderman Piet Dowell, together with the one and only Marty Levinson. Thanks so much, Jim.
Thanks, Avi.
Okay, be well.